Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th District in session. This is Kerry Condata reporting. We'll be with your state legislators a little later in the show. There's a lot happening in Olympia. The bills are flying. They've been on the floor actually voting. And Keith Gaynor passed his first bill out of committee, and it's a very interesting bill. You're going to want to stick around and hear about that one. Of course, on the national scene, the State of the Union address was the big story of the week, and then the unveiling of the Great Green Deal, or whatever they call it. Maybe that was the low life of the week or low light of the week. You have to hear this one to believe it. All right, and at the conclusion of today's show, we're going to tell you where's the safest place in America to live. You might recognize the name, but you may never have heard of it prior to now. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 12th District in session. Yes, we're going to be visiting our state legislators shortly. They have a lot to talk about. They've actually been on the floor passing bills. Things are heating up in Olympia. And Representative Keith Gaynor passed his first bill out of committee, a bill that should sound fairly familiar. But first, let's talk about some news. In international news, we are continuing to follow the story down in Venezuela. The fact is that more and more countries are supporting the opponent, the opposition leader, and only China and Russia are now standing behind Maduro. The things are getting hot and heavy with the caravans trying to get into Venezuela with food are being stopped by the military at Maduro's request. So people are getting very, very hungry. It's getting very bleak down there. There is some rumor of potential military action, but we haven't seen it from the U.S. or from anybody else. But it is getting very, very tough down there. There are people fleeing. We've heard that a lot of the soldiers are leaving. Maduro soldiers are actually defecting and leaving the country. So we'll keep you up to date as things continue. Brexit, well, it sounds like things are heating up. We talked about this last week, and it's not getting any better. There was some choice words said by a few of the European Union leaders, which really prompted the British to react. They are back to the negotiating table, but things are very heated over in Europe over this situation. They've only got until March 29th to come up with some sort of an agreement, or it just happens automatically, and that may not be the best situation for anybody. Last but not least, on the international scene, China. Negotiations continue on trade. The president says things are moving in a positive direction. Of course, in this state, we are very concerned with that agreement. It has a lot of bearing on the 12th District, and we hope that they come to some conclusion very soon. The other agreements seem to be in good shape. This is the last major agreement that needs to be finished. Well, a big week in politics, lots going on across the nation, but the biggest item was the State of the Union address. Nobody was sure just how it would go. It was delayed for various reasons with the government shutdown and negotiations going on over the border security issue. But the show must go on, and President Donald Trump came on and put on a very forceful speech. He really said all the things he normally says. He stuck to his guns on border control, but he also threw a few bones to the other side, which was very interesting. I think it was a little bit more broad-based than some of us expected, and I think that's a good thing. It looks to me like Donald Trump is getting back into the populist position that got him elected. The results from that speech were kind of interesting. He was interrupted 98 times for applause. There were several rounds and chants of USA, USA, as you heard, and even a happy birthday song was sung. It's a very unusual State of the Union address, and yet it was more interactive than what we've seen in the past, and that prompted the polls to look pretty good after the event. CBS and CNN both scored it with a 76% positive rating. I think that shocked some of the folks on CNN, only 24% negative. Republicans supported it 97%. Independents a whopping 82%. That was the shocker. And even 1/3 of Democrats, a little over 30% of Democrats, thought it was a good speech. I got to tell you, I thought it was an excellent speech. I have not seen one that was so interactive and a little bit more to the point, but still a little soft around the edges. I think it was well done, and I think it was well received, especially by the folks here in the 12th District. Just a couple more statistics on those results. On immigration, 72% of the people in the United States agreed on the positions on immigration. I think it's getting very evident that border security is a very popular item and that Donald Trump is not running by himself on this one. On getting us out of the Middle East and out of Afghanistan, 74% approved of that idea. I think that is something I've talked about for years. We are well overdue to get out of those areas. We just don't need to be there anymore. 19 years is enough. And on meeting with the North Korean leader, that was a surprise in the speech that no one really expected, that he will be meeting again with the North Korean leadership, and that was received with a 78% positive response. So it looks all in all like the winner is Donald Trump for the State of the Union. He did very well, and of course the American people, I think, got a good view of where we're going, or where he hopes to take us. And I think the losers were probably the Democrats, who really kind of acted like spoiled sports throughout, particularly around some of the issues that were very sensitive. The all-white uniforms were a little interesting, but let's just say Nancy Pelosi looked a little out of place up there and didn't go maybe as smoothly as they had hoped. I think, again, Donald Trump ruled the night on this one. Speaking of that late-term abortion issue, it came up in the State of the Union speech, and it's been talked about more than probably any news story in the last few weeks. It seems like another state is jumping on board. Massachusetts says they are looking to pass legislation to approve abortion up until birth. I just cannot believe that is happening, but that seems to be spreading, particularly on the East Coast states. It is very interesting to note, I heard this on a talk show, that in the presidential campaign, in a debate with Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump at the time, before he was president, was heavily criticized for saying that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats would support abortion up till birth. If she was elected president, it would probably become the law of the land. He was roundly criticized for weeks on that particular issue. It looks like it actually came true. The other big story this week was the revealing of the Green Deal. It is a very interesting document. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but first I want to bring up another little note that or a little story that probably didn't get a lot of press, but is very, very important to the direction we go in the future. New York State has a severe budget problem, and the reason is because many of its richest or most productive folks, the big taxpayers, are leaving the state due to high taxes. Now, this has been talked about by a lot of folks, that if you tax people enough, they'll just pack their stuff and move, and it seems that's exactly what's happening in New York City. It's interesting that the governor was asked if he could increase taxes on the rich. He said, I already did that. It isn't working very well. And he admitted that that has been a problem. And here's the facts. In New York State, 1% of the public, 1% of the tax-paying public pays 48% of the taxes already. Now, that's about as progressive as it can get, and it isn't working out very well for New York, as it won't work out very well for the United States if we move that direction. A great side story. All right, let's talk about the Green Deal. This document's interesting. It's got a lot of pie-in-the-sky ideas in it. It's mostly about infrastructure, but the goals are what's amazing. Moving completely off of, completely to renewable energy by 2030, not 2040, not 2050, but just in 10 years, including the elimination of all jet aircraft at that time. I'm not sure how we're going to get across the country. There's talk of new high-speed electric rail, and I guess we'll have electric boats to get across the ocean. But the fact is, eliminating air travel in 10 years seems to be a stretch by any imagination. And this entire package was kind of panned by even some of the most critical climate change supporters, because it's really out there. The fact is, it calls for billions of dollars in investments in grids, in smart buildings, and a number of other things. And of course, a big increase in public transportation. But nowhere in the deal does it say how we're going to pay for all this, and the numbers are actually staggering. But what it does mention, that once again, comes back to what this is really all about, folks. It talks about racial and economic equality. It brings up guaranteed jobs for everyone. It brings up expand and support of labor unions throughout the United States, and universal health care and housing for all. Does that sound like an environmental bill? No, it really doesn't. If it sounds familiar, it's a lot like the Paris Accord. This is all about socialism, folks. It's not about climate. Now, do we need to deal with the climate? Absolutely. We should err on the side of science and say, let's do what we can to keep things moving in the right direction. But this is not the right direction, and this isn't about climate. The Green Deal is really about socialism. And back stateside, Olympia is flying. As I said earlier, bills are hitting the floor. They're coming out of committee. But the story all week that's really captured people in Eastern Washington is the refusal of sheriffs throughout the state, not just in Eastern Washington, to enforce Initiative 1639, at least until the courts weigh in on its constitutionality. We'll talk to our state legislators about that, and we'll talk to Keith Gaynor about his first bill out of committee. It should look pretty familiar. We'll be right back with your state legislators. This is the 12th District. We're going in session. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, the 12th District, and we are in session with our state legislators from the 12th District via Skype from Olympia. Guys, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having us.
Sounds like we got a little better technology today. We've been having some issues, but this is much better. Actually, guys, just let me know what went on this week. I've got some questions for you, but tell me how your week went.
Well, I would like to just start by telling a little story that happened in Transportation Council Committee where a couple came in and has to do with Gold Star plates, license plates that are given to survivors, I guess, whether they be parents or spouses of people who have lost their lives in the armed service. And what had happened was a gold plate had expired and they came in to renew it, and they had to deal with going through a whole another process of verifying that in fact there was a loss of life. And so what we did in committee was we took the bill, we approved it, and passed it out of committee and just in that session. And I think there were a couple legislators that had been there like 18 years. That's only happened like once or twice before. But it was really nice to be able to do that with the couple still there. They were able to see the legislation actually take place and become passed out of committee right in their presence. So that was a good measure on our part, I guess, to make sure that it happened.
Yeah, that is terrific. That's only happened a couple of times that I can remember, and it really is a special event when that happens. Mike, how about your week?
Yeah, we've been extremely busy in the fourth week, I guess, of session. We've continued to work on capital budget negotiations every Tuesday and Thursday night, so we're seeing more of those things come to fruition. We are actually starting to exec bills out of appropriations, so we're starting to spend some money, and we're starting to see some of the ramifications of policy as well in those committees. The big thing coming up in the next week, really, though, is what we've been preparing for in the Education Committee is simple majority, and that'll be heard on Monday. The hope is we've articulated our position well enough that folks around the Capitol here know what that impact would look like, especially on the capital budget. Could cost as much as $3 billion, keeping in mind our own capital budget this year is $4.4 billion. So, if it sucks up that much money, it just isn't about the philosophy anymore. It's about actual dollars and cents.
Now, this is the issue on bonds. We've done levies already, so this is bonds, and this has been up several times, but it looks like this year it's got a little traction.
Yeah, so the conversation is vacillating between 50% and 55%. What would the policy actually look like? Regardless, it costs the capital budget way too much money to come into fruition, and hopefully we'll win on that front, where we can explain that really we don't, it's not about where we are on the policy. It's about actually having enough money to implement it if we were to do something different.
All right. What else happened this week in the committees? Anything else that we should be checking in on?
Okay.
Well, in my committees, we're talking about the elections. We're talking about a 17-year-old vote, allowing 17-year-olds to vote in the presidential and primaries if they will be 18. But then from the election standpoint, we're talking about the financial part, where we'd shift the state's obligation from the odd years to the even years, which really are the bigger years. So that would be very helpful for the counties. We've also talked about license fees and raising some for not only the sub-agents, but also for the counties who are processing all the licenses. So a number of things in the works.
Okay. Go ahead.
One of the big things we discussed this morning, I should mention, in education, and actually exec'd out, was the school safety omnibus bill. And really, it was passed out unanimously. The big thing that happened in that piece of policy was setting up threat assessment programs, which all of these specialists in the field, as well as survivors, are telling us would really do the trick. Meaning, what are these kids? Who are we identifying as a potential risk, and what are we doing to help them? So having these threat assessments go statewide into every school, and it's very doable. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money. It's just a matter of setting up the strategy.
Well, it's nice to see some agreement early on some bills. I did have some other questions for you that we want to get to. The big news story over here all week has been county after county after county, sheriffs stepping up saying they will not enforce 1639. What is that? What kind of talk is that generating over there? It's about 20 counties now, and I notice they're still passing some more gun bills out of committee.
Yeah, so the question that we're trying to understand on both fronts, so on the initiative front and on the law enforcement front, what is the constitutionality of both, and trying to really drill down and see what they're allowed to do, what the policy actually does it align correctly with the Constitution, does it not? And there are obviously going to be some challenges, and are challenges right now to that initiative. So it's really hard to tell at this point. So that's where we've kind of left the discussion.
Okay. And another news story that's been very strong is the measles issue down in Clark County and the vaccine situation. Now, that bill has been up and down for the years that I was there as far as forcing vaccines, as far as making them mandatory. What are you hearing in the caucus on this one?
I would say we're divided as a caucus. You know, the bill itself addresses a real issue that's happening in Clark County. I mean, where you have sort of a epidemic occurring down there with measles. Personally, I'm opposed to the bill. I believe we shouldn't mandate vaccines, but I think there is a public responsibility to ensure some sort of safety. So what is that? So I think you have people on both sides of that issue in the caucus.
And we've had some good feedback, at least I have, from constituents about this very issue and making some good cases. I mean, there's some nuances to this as far as the MMR vaccine. And so, I think there are some things that need to be fleshed out yet before we come to a conclusion.
Okay, I appreciate the update on that. Another issue that's near and dear to the governor's heart is the death penalty. What's happening on that as far as movement on the bills?
Well, we haven't seen any of that in the House yet. I think that discussion is being had in the Senate. It may end up much like it did in the last session, where they struggled to move it out of committee and out of the Senate. So it's hard to say what that will look like for us. No one has approached us, or me at least, on this conversation, so I will wait to hear.
And some of these issues I'm finding are happening. The issue is really in the Senate, and we haven't seen any activity on our side. And so I know I haven't always been aware of some of the issues that have been happening on the other side of the chamber.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. One house or the other takes the lead. Well, I have to ask Keith this. I heard rumor that you passed your first bill out of committee, and it was a bipartisan bill, and it might sound kind of familiar to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the previous representative who directly preceded me was able to get a proviso in the budget that allowed for the fuel stickers to be on the pumps. And actually, it would expire June 30th. And so I was able to even attach an amendment, Gary, that it will actually take place on July 1st. And I am referring to Carrie had gotten this done last, I think, about 2 years ago now. And it's been in place. And so this will just continue the practice of making sure the pumps are posted with the actual tax that you pay.
Well, it sounds like if the majority party gets their way, there might be a 6% or 6 cent increase in that, and the stickers will have to be changed. So I think your timing is excellent, and I appreciate you keeping that going. I think it's a great idea. Last but not least, gentlemen, the weird story of the week is that we may be the first state to allow human composting. Are you aware of what's going on with that issue?
I just heard about it, and I couldn't believe that it was for real. But
yeah, it's been heard in committee. It's been heard in committee this week. It's and it's actually been around here before, as you know, Carrie. That conversation has happened in previous years. Didn't make much traction. This may be the year it does. I think it's really sort of a hard thing to wrap your mind around. It's a little morbid to have to go that direction to think about, but we'll see.
Well, we are a very environmentally based state, I guess. Okay, we're going to only have about a minute left. Let's see. What's left? I think we covered everything on my list. What did I miss?
Well, one thing that we have heard from constituents about, and that was adult family homes. And we did vote on a bill today that allows the number to go from 6 to 8 in an adult home. So I know that there were a number of people that were concerned about that, and so they will have that opportunity to expand their service.
Yeah, you guys actually were on the floor today. Anything special that you want to talk about on the floor? First big floor action.
Yeah. Well, I just actually came from a ranking members meeting, and we were talking a little bit about that because it's actually a little slower than in years past. So the speaker's really using this opportunity. It's kind of a throttling of, I think, some of his members, you know, and trying to figure out what he's going to let out and what he's not. And even on the list that we started with, the run list we started with got whittled down while we were on the floor. So it's kind of interesting. We're trying to figure out what his strategy is, and frankly, I'm glad because the volume of bills that we've seen already introduced is incredible. So I'm happy to slow things down.
Well, it's nice to hear that Frank Chop is still in some form of command. I know this is his last rally, so I'm glad he's pulling back on the reins a little bit. He's always been good at that. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to come back next week. Things are starting to rev up. You're going to be on the floor more, and we're going to have some of the big bills and the big debates coming up. So we look forward to hearing from you next week. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, that's it. We'll be right back. Well, that about wraps it for us today, folks. This is the 12th District in session. We will be back next week with all the news across the United States and across the world. Politics are really exciting right now in the national scene. We'll see if we have another shutdown or agreement on border security. Locally, the bills are hitting the floor. We'll be hearing again from our state legislators as some of the more controversial subjects begin to work their way through Olympia. And what is the safest place in America to live? Well, it was interesting. There was a survey across the United States looking at what is the safest town to live in the entire United States. It just happens to be in North Carolina, and the name of the town, Cary, C-A-R-Y. Cary, North Carolina, the safest place to live. You are always safe with Cary. This is Cary Kandata. This is the 12th District. We'll be back next week.